Hey guys, Bud Elliot here, back again on Cover 3. It's summer school. It's Oklahoma. I'm bringing in my man Josh Callaway of Sooners Illustrated to talk everything Oklahoma. Josh, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, appreciate you having me.
Josh dressed professionally today. If you're watching on YouTube, I am not. I'm going to take you behind the scenes here. That is me not exactly accounting for all of the area of my forehead and getting totally nuked out there at the Elite 11, which I'm back from. Last year, got to see Oklahoma quarterback Jackson Arnold light it up at the Elite 11. So maybe we'll talk about him in today's show. But yeah, I'm excited to talk a little Sooners, man. I obviously went to Florida State, so I got to see them up close in the last time they were on the field in the bowl game here in Orlando. But what was kind of the vibe covering Brent Venables' first year there for Oklahoma?
It was weird. It was weird because, entering the season, I think optimism was through the roof, frankly, that things were going to be just fine. After Lincoln Riley leaves, Brent Venables comes in. I mean, the day that Lincoln Riley left and that initial shock wore off, every Oklahoma fan wanted Brent Venables. He was the number one option immediately. And he comes in, he says all the right things. OU fans are really excited about the defense being revamped and, all these things. There's just all this thoughts and optimism. The, pride for the program couldn't be any higher. The spring game had 70,000 people at it last, his first year. So going into the year, optimism couldn't have been any higher. But as the season went on, it got a little uglier and uglier and some tough losses. Gabriel goes out. They lose a couple games, lose to Texas by near 50 points and get shut out. And they just kept losing close games. They were terrible in close games last year. And so the overall mood of the fan base and the team, I think, is still relatively positive toward Brent Venables and everything. But yeah, the vibe going to the back end of last season was not good. And there was a lot of people questioning already in year one, is this hire going to work? Was this the right move? Maybe what we had hoped for wasn't actually going to play out the way everybody had foresaw it. So we'll see how things shake out here going into year two, obviously. But the vibe is a little, still cautiously optimistic about the future, still recruiting at a high level, things like that. But the on-field product last year was, not what everybody had hoped for.
On the show, I have a term, I call it a must-champing, whereas if you go hire a defensive coordinator, make him your head coach, and he immediately hires kind of a stodgy offensive coordinator who really acts more like a defensive coordinator, I was encouraged that Brent Venables did not do so. And clearly, one of his mentors, Bob Stoops, did the same thing when he got his head coach job off of DC. He went and hired a guy that gave him all kinds of fits when he was Florida's DC, and that was at the time Kentucky OC Mike Leach. So the fact that he went and got Jeff Lebby, I still think is kind of a feather in his cap that they are actively trying to score points in addition to playing, in theory, better defense than they played under Lincoln Riley. And Lebby brought quarterback Dylan Gabriel over. I know he got hurt in the middle of the year, and he also got, if I recall, was it Texas Tech? He got popped pretty good on that throwback pass.
By Reggie Pearson, who's on the team now. He transferred to Oklahoma. Reggie Pearson. Yeah, kind of funny.
That interesting spring practices. Now, I love Jackson Arnold, the guy they signed. Is it crazy of me to ask? Is this Gabriel's job?
Yeah, it's Gabriel's job, for now. Okay. He'll start in week one. I'd be shocked if he didn't. But I think there will be some pressure, like we were just saying, with the way last season went, that if it goes a similar way and they're, 3-2, 4-2, something like that, that noise is going to get loud. And frankly, Oklahoma fans have been really spoiled by quarterback play in the last 5-6 years or so. You had two guys win the Heisman, another one that was runner-up. And then Caleb Williams was here for 2 seconds and dazzled, and everybody loved it. And so you go to what Dylan Gabriel had last year, and he was fine. He was fine. He was a solid college quarterback. He's not going to be a first-round pick. He's probably not going to be a Heisman finalist, anything crazy like that. But that's where the bar is for Oklahoma fans right now. Like I was just saying, all these guys they've had in the last 10 years or so now. So it's Dylan Gabriel's job, but that noise will get loud, even if they're losing and it's not necessarily his fault, because they went 6-7 last year. And I wouldn't say it was necessarily Dylan Gabriel's fault. His numbers were okay, but
he couldn't help but feel
like in a lot of those close games, especially, man, if Caleb Williams was still here, I bet they win this game. Like that happened 4 or 5 times last year. I bet with all things the same, but Caleb Williams and Norman last year, they probably win 9 or 10 games. And that's the difference between a transcendent Heisman level quarterback and then that next level, which is where Dylan Gabriel is, at least as of right now. So it's Gabriel's job, but Jackson Arnold's right there because I'm right with you. He's a special player, and he was great in spring practice. He got better every single week. He was good in the spring game. Fans love him. He's as popular of a player as I've ever seen for someone that's done nothing. I mean, he's been there for spring ball. So that noise will get loud if he struggles, but he'll start in week 1.
I assume that obviously Arnold will have some packages. Oklahoma's schedule starts really, really easy.
Yeah.
Cincinnati appears to be quite down. Iowa State obviously has plenty of issues. Arkansas State, SMU. SMU is probably the best team they play in the first. I think SMU is better than Iowa State personally, but that's probably the best team they play in the month of September. And then you got the Texas game and a much tougher back half. But I imagine they'll work Arnold in some, at least just to get the kid reps, especially because unfortunately Gabriels been a guy that's taken shots both at UCF and at Oklahoma. Kind of a big picture question here. So good buddy of mine, Bill Connolly, he's projecting this offense to go from 10th nationally to 6th. And I look at this, and on the one hand, it's the second year under Levy's system, right? And you would assume more continuity. On the other hand, Marvin Mims, Braden Willis, Eric Gray, Theo Weiss, Anton Harrison, Wanya Morris, Chris Murray. That's a lot of very talented players who are now playing on Sundays. Not all of those guys are on Sundays, but a good number of them, and some of them are pretty high picks. Do you think this offense is better than last year's?
Not on paper.
Okay.
And I think the biggest thing you mentioned him is Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims probably going to go down as one of the more underrated, maybe college football players, period, but especially at OU in recent history. I mean, you look at his numbers; they're right there with anybody the last few years, and right away. I mean, as a freshman, he set Big 12 freshman touchdowns record in a shortened COVID season, and so I think maybe just generally speaking, we've kind of underrated how hard it's going to be to replace him and the attention that defenses have to pay attention to him. You have to know where he is on the field. I've always joked that he can get open over the top anytime he wants, and not having that, and they have some good receivers on this team, but not having that bona fide number one, at least on paper, is going to be a tough one to replace. So it could be, offensive lines filling in some holes. They did make some nice transfer additions, both in the receiver room and as well as on that offensive line to plug in some gaps. I think they have a couple of really good tackles. Walter Rouse came in from Stanford. He's going to be really, really good for them. And then Tyler Guyton, who came from TCU 2 off seasons ago.
He was good in the bowl game.
Yeah, he's going to start at that other tackle spot across from Rouse, I'd imagine. So those guys are really solid. So you have some good replacements there. But Anton Harrison, like you said, a first-round pick. I mean, you're replacing legit players. So that's going to be tough. They have some good receivers they've added in the portal. There's some question marks. I do think running back is really, really deep. I think they're going to have a really explosive run game. Gavin Sawchuk is going to be a sophomore from Colorado. He barely played last year because he was a true freshman, enrolled in the summer. But they gave him the ball a little bit in that Cheez-It Bowl against Florida State, and he was great. And Javonte Barnes had a really good freshman season as well. So I think those two together are going to be a really nice combo. So I think this offense will be fine. I mean, Jeff Levy's a good offensive coordinator. That up-tempo is really hard to deal with. But it's hard for me to say, at least now in June, that they'll be better than what they had last year. But Gabriel's got to stay healthy. That's the biggest thing. That killed them last year. When he was out, they fell off a cliff.
Yeah, I was I don't want to disparage the other players on the team, but I was shocked at the level of quarterback play in the Red River Shootout. I was like, oh my gosh, this is unplayable.
Yeah, the kind of narrative that when Lincoln Riley left the cupboard bare for Oklahoma was a little overblown, not overblown with quarterbacks. Yeah. He left nothing. Literally no quarterbacks were left on the team. I mean, Caleb Williams transferred, Spencer Rattler transferred. They had no other scholarship quarterbacks on the team when Brent Venables took over. They brought in Gabriel, and then they just were desperate, frankly, for another Power 5 scholarship quarterback, and that's where they got Davis Bevell, who was the third string at Pittsburgh the previous year. So, that was the one position that they really knew that they could not afford an injury. And of course, Dylan Gabriel did go down in that TCU game, and we saw it was worse than even our mind let it wander if Gabriel went down.
At receiver, you mentioned the loss of Mims. Who would you say it is the most likely player to step up and be the one? Like I see Farouk returning, had a good number of targets last year.
Yeah.
Do they feel like they've hit on any of these guys that are transfer portal guys? It took 2 or 3 transfer portal receivers, I know.
Yeah, the receiver room is really interesting because I do think Jalil Farouk is the preferred number one, kind of assume that throne. He was pretty good last year. His freshman season was weird because he didn't play a whole lot. Him and Caleb Williams came in together. They were like really good friends in high school, and he got to play in that Alamo Bowl against Oregon after a lot of guys transferred out. An opportunity came for him, and he was great in the Alamo Bowl. But then Caleb Williams left, and everybody thought, Farouk's going to go with him. They're really good friends. But he stayed, and he hung out. He had a good season last year. And Jeff Lebby has really done a really, it's fun to watch job with making him kind of that Swiss Army knife type of player. He'll run the ball. He'll do wildcat quarterback. He's kind of, I don't know, like a Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey. Like you kind of just throw him wherever type of a player. So he's really dynamic. He's fun to watch. He would be the best guess to be the number 1 receiver next year, but they did add a lot. Angelo Anthony comes from Michigan. Brennan Thompson from Texas. They have some really exciting freshmen. Jaquez Petaway is really highly touted freshman coming in. DJ Graham is one that's very interesting. He was a cornerback. A lot of people know him for making the one-hand interception against Nebraska a couple years ago. He moves to receiver. So he's interesting. Like, what do you make of him? Then there's these transfers that they added last year that didn't really play a lot last year. LV Bunkley Shelton came from Arizona State, and JJ Hester came from Missouri. Both those guys didn't play a whole lot last year, some injuries, things like that. Are they going to step up and be a big role? So the options are there. But yeah, it's a lot of guys who haven't done it at this level yet. The talent feels like it's there, but who's actually going to rise up and do it? Farouk, I think, definitely is the preferred number 1. Drake Stoops would be that definite preferred number 2, but then kind of who joins them? There's a lot of options, but somebody's got to step up and do it. Absolutely.
So the vibe I'm picking up is offensive line much less of a concern than receiver is, given who they seem to have hit on in the portal and the fact that Guyton was pretty darn good down the stretch and in that bowl game. Let's switch over to defense. Now, I think you have to project some improvement on defense this year for Oklahoma. Last year, Connolly had them 70th, that would have been like the second worst defense that Riley ever fielded. So,
yeah.
And I'm curious, I'll open this up and hit you with that position. What position do you think is the most improved? Like, if this defense takes a good jump, why? Other than just continuity, understanding Venables' system, which undoubtedly there will be some of that. Is there a position group that you think is primed to take a big jump?
Yeah, kind of 2. So I'm going to kind of cheat, but linebacker is for sure. Definitely the linebacking room, which is Brent Venables' baby. That's his position. He coaches the linebackers pretty much himself. Ted Roof, the defensive coordinator, also doubles as the linebackers coach. But if you go out to a practice, Brent Venables is with the linebackers the whole time. That's his position. And they have some really good dudes there. Danny Stutzman was maybe the best defensive player on the team last year. He's back. And they went and added Deshaun McCullough, who, if you look at any list of biggest transfer portal ads, anywhere you look, Deshaun McCullough's on that list. He's going to be big time for Oklahoma. He's going to probably play that kind of cheetah role, which last year Deshaun White played and had the best year of his career. So Deshaun McCullough is a freak of nature. He's got length for days. His arms and legs are so long, and he's someone that fans are really, really excited about. Then they have all these second-year linebackers, guys that were freshmen last year that they just didn't really use. They didn't want to toss into the fire, that they're all hoping to make big jumps. Kobe McKenzie's probably my favorite of that group. He's got a lot to like. It's just physicality and maturity off the field, all that good stuff. Jaron Canick's another one who was actually a Clemson commit and then, flipped over to Oklahoma whenever Venables took the job. Kip Lewis, who led the entire team in tackles in the spring game. He was fantastic. So they have all these young linebackers that are really, really exciting. And then real quick, the safety room as well. The safety room is loaded. I don't know how Brandon Hall, the safeties coach, managed to stockpile the talent that he has there. Billy Bowman is back. They added Reggie Pearson, who I mentioned earlier for Texas Tech, smoked Dylan Gabriel on that trick play. They have Peyton Bowen, who's this 5-star freshman coming in. They have Key Lawrence, who's been around this team, played a lot of snaps the last 2 years. So, the safety room is loaded with options. So those 2 spots especially are probably the 2 strongest positions maybe on the entire team going into next year, I think.
I know I'd cover 3 last year during their bye week. We had Kent State staff on, right? And that's a good staff. Obviously, Coach Sauter's now at Minnesota. Sean Lewis is now the offensive coordinator at Colorado. And pretty sure they said this on the air. I wouldn't say this on the show if it was something disparaging. They said that Bowman was the best safety that they had ever seen or ever coached against. So, that's really high praise for, and those guys have not been in the MAC forever, right? Like they had a brief stop in the MAC, but they've been in the Big 12 for a long while. So yeah, I'm certainly really excited about the safety position. You do lose Justin Broyles, you lose Deshaun White, TJ Coldren. There's a lot of guys they lose who weren't necessarily difference makers, but the fact that they didn't go in the portal, do you read something into it that they like a lot of the guys they already have on the roster that maybe just 1 year away last year? Because they took one portal guy.
Yeah, it's funny because Oklahoma didn't have a single defensive guy drafted last year. It's the first time. I Should have looked it up. It's been a long time since they didn't have a single defensive player drafted. Part of that was because the defense was not very good, like we've talked about. When actually numbers went down across the board from the previous season, the last year under Alex Grinch. But the other part of that is that pretty much all their best defensive players are back. Billy Bowman, like we just said, Danny Stutzman. Their best cornerback is Woody Washington. He's back. Their best edge rusher was Ethan Downs. He's back. I mean, most of the best pieces of their defense are back. And the ones that did move on, like you mentioned, a couple of guys, they did have David Agwebu transferred to Houston. So they had a couple of guys that were starters and big, snap count guys that moved on. But they've filled those holes with, like I said, Deshaun McCullough, Rondell Bothroyd from Wake Forest is going to be one of their best edge rushers. Trace Ford is going to be one of their best edge rushers. He came from Oklahoma State. They added Kendall Dolby. He's a JUCO cornerback. I think he's going to play a lot of snaps next year. Then definitely, kind of like you were alluding to, a lot of guys making that year 2 jump. I mentioned all those linebackers. Gentry Williams would be another one I throw in there. He's a cornerback, just a freshman last year, played kind of sparingly. He's going to be a big part of this defense, I think, next year. I think that they're banking on a lot of guys making that year 2 jump, plus the guys they added in the portal, plus the fact that, like I said, they had a lot of their best defensive players just be back on the team from last year. I think all those things combined, they're thinking that the defense could, as Brent Venables put it, be on another planet, I think was the exact quote. That's the way he put it. So he doesn't usually just say stuff just to say it. So I think there's reasons to be, optimistic that they're going to take a pretty good jump defensively.
If the jump doesn't happen, and I'm obviously I think it will, you think there'll be some level of jump, obviously.
Yeah.
It's D tackle, right? That holds them back. I don't see the difference makers on the interior. And to be frank, like they just went and got a JUCO D tackle. The results for getting very late in the game JUCO players typically reeks of desperation and are not typically good. It doesn't mean this kid will be bad or it won't help them.
Yeah.
But like that's not a good sign typically, unless you think you found a crazy hidden gem. Maybe they did, but am I wrong to think this room's a weakness?
No, not at all. That would be the weak spot, certainly of the defense, maybe of the whole team. When you look at the roster and you look at, their 2 best D tackles are both gone, Jalen Redmond and Jeffrey Johnson, guys who played most of the snaps last year. And they just don't, there's guys here, Isaiah Coe is back. They've made multiple transfer additions, but like you said, when you add multiple guys in the summer, because they added Tennessee's DeJoun Terry and they added Philip Paya, I hope I say it, from Utah State. Both those guys were added in the summer, post spring. So usually when you're adding 3 guys at one position in the summer, that lets you know that that's how they felt about things after the spring, basically in a roundabout way. So, that is a concern.
Is Paya the guy that was hurt a lot at Utah State?
Yes. Yeah, he didn't play a lot over there.
So I actually, Oklahoma fans may enjoy this. A buddy of mine works in personnel in the Mountain West, and he thought he was a dude and was very obviously you hate to see somebody injured, but it was like, I'm glad he wasn't on the field when we had to play them because he would have messed us up. It's like, if he's healthy, that's potentially really helpful.
Yeah, I think him and DeJoun Terry, who I just mentioned from Tennessee, who they added this summer, both those guys have a chance to be like 2 of the better defensive tackles on the team. They added them in May and June, So Isaiah Coe, Jordan Kelly is another guy. He's been on the team a long time. He'll be in that room. He'll be solid. You kind of know what you're getting with Jordan Kelly. He's not going to be a guy who's going to be a first-round pick or something. He's been on the program a long time, but he is a steady force that you feel okay about putting out there. They also moved Jonah Laulu, who was a defensive end last year. They moved him inside. Devon Sears, another transfer they added. So they have a lot of guys, kind of like their receiver room in a sense. Like, there's a lot of options here, but who's going to actually do it, So, but it is, every other spot on the defense you feel really quite good about, frankly. But the D tackles is kind of like, okay, who's it going to be, though? So we'll see how that shakes out.
From an opposing offense perspective, I mean, SMU should be a good offense. I think you have to think Texas is a good offense because if Ewers doesn't work out, we saw what Malik Murphy did in the spring game. Like they should be able to score a lot of points. I think UCF will be relatively decent. Kansas will be a good offense. Defensively, if you guys have listened to Summer School episode, probably not. West Virginia, I don't think can throw the football. TCU's kind of a maybe. So a lot of this will come down to their ability to stop the run because most of those teams don't throw the ball exceptionally well. That's kind of an interesting quirk of this schedule.
It's a funky schedule. It's light. The Big 12 kind of did them some favors on the way out. They don't play Kansas State. They don't play Baylor. They don't play Texas Tech. Some of these schools and teams that are giving them problems. And then the non-conference, if you remember, they were supposed to play Georgia. but the game got taken off because of the SEC move, and they got replaced with that SMU game. So their non-conference schedule is extra light, even lighter than normal. So
but Jim Harbaugh likes this schedule. I mean,
Yeah.
this is super light. I mean, even the road game at Tulsa is going to be kind of a de facto home game.
It'll be a lot of events. It's like an hour and a half north.
Yeah, and Tulsa team I've already bet the under on. They lost I think 7 players to either the NFL draft or Power 5 transfer. So that's typically a Tulsa roster is not going to survive that all that well. Let's talk special teams for a minute. They lose punter Michael Turk, who was kind of a stud. I didn't realize Oklahoma was this good at punting, and he killed it for him. Have you seen the transfer they took from Central Michigan? This is really in the weeds, but I mean, if you're watching a summer podcast, is he any good?
I think so. Okay. I think so. It is hard to say. You know, they have been spoiled in this area as well. Like you said, Michael Turk has actually been sneaky a really good punter 2 years ago. No, actually this year too, I believe. What hurt him is that they didn't punt a lot. The offense has been pretty good the last couple of years. And so because of that, he didn't qualify for a lot of, like nation's best measurables because he didn't have enough punts. But he's been really, really solid. And he actually moved into being a holder last year as well. So he kind of did a lot for them. And he had a huge leg. So, Luke Elzinga is the presumptive starting punter there. They also have Brady Braun as this young kid. Who's highly touted out of high school. Obviously kicking, recruiting stuff can get a little hard to follow sometimes, but he's somebody that'll be in that mix as well. Zach Schmidt, who was their starting place kicker last year, is back, but he had a few really untimely misses. So I don't think that it's just a given that he's gotten to have the job again. So I don't know. The kicking game in general is a little kind of in flux at the moment. They were kind of, they had Gabe Burkish as the kicker for a long time, and Turk was a really good punter. So they're kind of having to move on in the era after those guys were really good for several years. Something, just put it out of your mind. You don't have to worry about it. Now you kind of have to worry about it again. So we'll see how that shakes out.
Just let me ask you a question here. What spot, when you're out at practice or when you're talking to your sources, would you say the drop off between starter and backups is the most extreme? Like the spot where you're like, all right, they have to stay healthy here because these backups just are not playable.
Yeah, I would probably say, I would honestly probably say the offensive line is a little sketchy if they lose some starters. I think the starting 5 they have there in Bill Bedenbaugh's group is really quite solid, and he's recruited pretty well the last couple of years. Some of these guys are ready to make that jump to being, playing a lot of snaps, maybe even starting some of these guys. But I don't know what the offensive line depth is, relatively speaking. I mean, outside of those, I think Rouse and Guyton, like we were just saying earlier, those 2 tackles are going to be really good. I think could be like all Big 12 good, but I don't really know what the options are right away after those 2. Same kind of goes for the guard spots. And frankly, Andrew Rame has been the center, and he had a lot of high hopes coming, into his career, and he had some nice moments, but that his kind of stock has kind of been dipping down a little bit. He didn't have that great of a year last year, and then spring was kind of iffy for him. So is he the starting center? They added another one, Troy Everett from Appalachian State, to kind of push him on that job. So I think offensive line is not really too much of a problem, but if they do have like 2 or 3 injuries and they start to really go in deep, that could get a little hodgepodge pretty quick. That would be my initial thought there.
And I don't think that's necessarily surprising for people that have listened to the first 20 minutes of the show, because Bedenbaugh's a good O-line coach. It's very impressive that they have been able to, through the portal and through some depth, patch together a unit that is not a huge drop-off from last year, we think. I mean, you lose Harrison, Morris, and Murray, and you're not decimated. Yeah, that's huge. It's unrealistic to think you wouldn't have a drop off between the new replacements and their replacements, right? Like that's
just another one too that I should have mentioned as well is a tight end spot is super thin. Probably the most thin tight end room I can remember in a while for Oklahoma. They brought back Austin Stogner, who was with Oklahoma, then left to go to South Carolina after Lincoln Riley left, and then now he's back. He is clearly the number 1 tight end. He's hoping, Braden Willis had a great year last year in Jeff Levy's offense. He's hoping for more of the same, kind of get him to the NFL type of thing. But after that, they have no tight ends that have like caught any sort of passes, been any sort of productive at the major college level so far. I mean, Blake Smith came from Texas A&M. He's more of a blocking tight end, and then it's just a bunch of young guys. So, I mean, tight end is thin. There's really not a great spin there. If Austin Stogner stays healthy, they'll be all right. But if he gets hurt and he's had some injury problems in the past, then I don't really know where they go as far as in the passing game, tight end wise. And Jeff Levy likes to use his tight end, so that could hinder them if that that situation arose.
But that'll be fascinating. I'll get you out of here on this. I really appreciate the time. Sooners Illustrated is totally killing them. You guys are obviously like experts on Oklahoma, and the recruiting coverage is great too. And it's a passionate, and professional approach. I've really enjoyed the work y'all have done over there. Is this like if they play to their ceiling, is this a team that like could make the playoffs and win a playoff game, or is the ceiling more like make the Big 12 title game potentially type thing? What's your kind of read on how good they could be if everything goes right?
Yeah, I definitely don't think they can win a playoff game. They're not going to be able to beat, your Bamas, your Georgias, your Ohio States. Not right now. Brent Venables hoping to get it there. If they continue to recruit the level that they are, they'll have a chance to get there soon. But not right now. I do think that they have a chance to make the playoff just simply because I think that they're right there. It's between OU and Texas to win the Big 12, in my opinion. And if you win a Power 5 league, you're kind of automatically in the mix. So it's going to take a lot. I don't think it's impossible. But I think 9 wins or 10 wins is probably what they're shooting for and they're hoping for. Make the Big 12 championship game. Let the chips fall where they may after that sort of a thing. But I don't think that they're quite good enough to be, on that upper echelon just yet. But they're recruiting a nice level. They made some really nice transfer additions. Like we were just saying, the schedule is really light. There's not that many losses on here that are excusable to happen. Like they should win probably 10 games. They really should. So if they do that and they win the Big 12, they go 11-1, win the Big 12 or something, they're probably going to be in that mix for the playoff. So that'll be probably if they made the playoff this year, massive success. It doesn't even almost matter what happens in the actual game itself at that point. But there's a lot of question marks before then, I think, for this team right now.
Josh Callaway, Sooners Illustrated. Appreciate it, man.